Yeah, well, the Greenville Memorial Auditorium, it was a Crockett stop every Monday night for fucking years, decades. And in 1986, that town had grossed over $600,000 for live wrestling events. Like at that point, probably about 30 or 32 of them by 86. They didn't go every Monday night, but I mean, we'd sold it out. Bash shows done 70 grand in that building.
Wow.
And Christmas afternoons, they would do fan appreciation on the way to the Omni or whatever. All seats $3, and they do $18,000 house at $3 tickets. It was an amazing town, but of course they were all amazing towns. About 5 years before we started running.
That's amazing. 5 years. Well, hey Doc, you and I have talked about this a number of times, and I don't even have this written down. But as Jim just said, that I got to ask it. So Doc and I have gone back and forth, and not that we disagree, but one of the things that we think hurt Smoky Mountain, as great as it was when the promotion was started, just based on what was going on in the wrestling business as a whole. It's in a down period. And we wonder often and speculate amongst ourselves, if you start, what did you say, Doc, a year or two later? What was the line that you said? If Jim starts later, is he more successful? I don't remember the year that you mentioned, though.
I don't know. It seems to me if you go 18 months to 24 months later and you're into 96 and 97, when everybody's wearing NWO shirts and the Monday Night Wars start, does that trickle down?
Well, actually, yeah, that's a very good point. I've always had impeccable timing. When we started, I didn't think it could hardly get any worse because, I mean, a lot of our shows in Knoxville outdrew shows that WCW was running in the Omni and in other major arenas. I remember one time, I think we outdrew Kemper Arena in Kansas City, but it just with every national TV talent that they had, but it did get worse. And I don't know if we'd have started at a different time, if we'd have started 2 years later, whether it'd been great. I think if we'd have probably existed 2 years later, that's when all of a sudden, even just because of the wrestling explosion, outlaw shows that had nobody on them started drawing houses and places. And more importantly, TV stations, instead of wanting to get paid to be basically hold their nose and run wrestling, all of a sudden we're looking for wrestling TV shows to put on. That would have been the biggest point. Because if we could have gotten the markets to exploit with the big shows like we had in Knoxville and we had in the Tri-Cities, Johnson City, and Eastern Kentucky for that extent. I mean, who else was drawing, fucking 2,000 people up in Eastern Kentucky hills at that point? Our shows in Pikeville, the Bluegrass Brawls, outdrew WCW in the Omni in Atlanta. But we couldn't get the other markets. If we got Greenville, Asheville, Spartanburg, or if we could have gotten Charleston, West Virginia, and been able to do the same thing, draw on a regular basis for live wrestling at that point. And I mean, Knoxville weekly through the 70s and Southeastern probably sold 150,000 tickets a year. I think if we'd have ran weekly in Knoxville at the Coliseum through our years, we would have probably had about 600 or 700 people a week, because the same people that came once a month to the worst shows would have come no matter how often we were there. Right?
Yeah.
You couldn't make money with that. But the 3 or 4 times a year in each market, we could do a kind of a blowout show, which whether it be Thanksgiving and Christmas and Sunday Bloody Sunday and Night of Legends in Knoxville, or whether it be once again Thanksgiving and Christmas, but then potentially a big show in March and the Fire on the Mountain show in August in Johnson City, Bluegrass Brawl every April. If we'd have had a few more TV markets and buildings where we could have popped those shows, I mean, the finances of wrestling then versus now are so ridiculous. If we'd have come up with an extra $20,000 a month, so $5,000, about what they spend on fucking delivery pizzas for the crew at Raw after the tapings, we would have been farting through silk, as Nick would have said. So but at the same time, you were going to find that. But I mean, we could go into Knoxville and just die in the Coliseum and only lose $3,000 because Sandy Scott was getting the Coliseum rent and staffing and Ticketmaster, police, EMT guy, the guy that ran the spotlight, the whole thing for like $2,700 or $2,800 or $3,000 or whatever, depending on the attendance. So it wasn't a massive money loser, but we could go in with a night of legends and make 20 grand in one night, or choose to have a TV truck there to shoot it for the video and make, 14 or 15 or whatever. Those mega shows could have worked in each, the way we were laid out, could have worked in each of the markets, and each market would have had its own special big show. But you couldn't get on fucking TV. So that was basically long-winded answer to your question. I'm sure we would have drawn better at the gate when wrestling got hot 2 years later, but the biggest thing would have been it would have been easier to get on fucking television. And if we'd had that, we could have done it by ourselves.
Yeah, you're right. That TV part of it that's a big deal. Obviously speaking, I mean, man, we've speculated that. We're like, if
we took Knoxville from scratch, where there was no full-time local promotion or TV show, and hadn't been in 2-3 years at that point, and started out in TV in February of '92 and house shows in May of '92. And you'll recall it was really by August of '93 is when we did the first big house with me and Bob in the lumberjack match, but we did almost 3,000 people and almost $20,000. Wow. By the time that the Sunday Bloody Sunday rolled around 6 months later, we did 40-something hundred people and $33,000. And then we did the Night of Legends we established, and we did 40-something hundred people and $39,000, I believe. And the next year in August, it was 40-something hundred people and $37,000 something. But the point is, there was growth despite the bad wrestling environment.
Right.
And there was growth in Johnson City, too. We started stronger in Johnson City than we did in Knoxville. I think our first show in Knoxville, about 900 people. Our first show in Johnson City was over 1,500. And we didn't hit the highs of the mega cards or the mega crowds like we did in Knoxville, but it was a smaller market. But still, when you can get a couple thousand people in Freedom Hall, and you're running it once a month for the big show, you're doing fairly well. Mm-hmm. But imagine what we could have done with Asheville, North Carolina, or Greenville, South Carolina, or Charleston, West Virginia. I always thought would have been a great market.
Yeah.
And, and trying to Chattanooga, I think we could have done well also, but the only Chattanooga TV we could ever get was 1 o'clock in the morning. So, but if we'd have followed that pattern in those other towns where you can draw, for your periodic big shows, which I looked at like my Bill Watts Superdome events, or Dusty Rhodes's Starcade or themed shows or whatever. If you could get 1,500, 2,000 people or more in a building that you ran once a month, 3 or 4 times a year, you had a pretty good fucking promotion going on, but you needed about 6 of those.